go up to the plant, okay? With the seaweed, that's not true. What we think of as a root when we look at these big seaweeds is actually a holdfast, and its whole purpose is to keep it anchored to the bottom of the ocean. So it has nothing in terms of nutrient conduct like a plant root does. Where they get the nutrients from or on the whole, the stipe, which we see there, and the fronds, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But that's important when you start looking, you want to look for clean waters, because if the waters are bad, then the seaweed will also be bad. Okay. So, again, it's not a plant. This holdfast that I was talking about, does this have a red thing? Yes. Okay, you can see there the yellow, the holdfast again, is just to anchor it to a big rock or to the bottom of the ocean. It does not serve as a root, it serves as a holdfast. Okay, and then we have the stipe there up in the top left. Can be used, it's just basically, it looks like the stem of a plant, and the purpose is to get that frond farther into the ocean water so I can collect nutrients from the ocean water. How thin or thick it is, or how long it is, can help you determine what seaweed you might have if you get into wanting to determine what you're eating, or you can just eat it. What we're mostly looking for are the fronds, and that's the big brown or green or red or whatever color the seaweed is. That's usually what we see. And with the plant we think of like a leaf, but it's called a frond. And then we have differentiations, like over here on the left you can see that midrib. Okay, and that's another identifier. So once you get into the brown seaweeds, it will tell you whether or not it's the laminaria or another one that you like better or you don't like it, it depends. Okay. And then we have the reproductive portion. So as we learn to gather, we want to know where the reproductive portion is so that we don't harvest those parts, so that we can continue to sustainably harvest over time. So on these plants, you can see it's at the base there by the stipe. And on this one, it's on the very tips of the frond. Right now, seaweeds, the study of seaweeds or phycology is not a well-financed science because it doesn't produce a lot of money like commercial fishing. And so a lot of the work is still being done on it. There are phycologists that have worked to further identify what seaweed is and what family it should be in and what its proper name should be. And I'm saying this because right now we have brown seaweed, red seaweed, green seaweed, and that kind of makes it easy for us, but that could change. But in your mind, if you think brown, green, and red, you'll be okay for now. So if we look at a beach, okay, you can see the reds there, the red. Generally smaller. There are two important species that we like. There's small green ones. We have one sample here, and you will find bits of it here and there. It's quite tasty, but we don't have a lot of it, as opposed to warmer waters where you find lots of greens and lots of reds. In these northern colder waters, what we find are lots and lots of big brown seaweeds. Okay. So if you don't get anything else from this talk, anything that's big, brown, and flat, like a piece of paper, is fair game. If you don't know what it is, if you don't know the name, doesn't matter, you can try it. Okay? Okay, you can all go now. Okay, so we do have formations where, like popweed, you always find you don't need a low tide, where other brown seaweeds that you may like will require a low tide to find. Okay, and I'm here this week because we have some really good low tides. And so here you can see some zonation here. Just the whole bottom are these big, beautiful brown ones, and then above it you can see some lighter, the fucus. And it's important to start noticing those things as you start thinking about what you might want to harvest and where you might want to go. Okay, so I'm going to start with the most abundant and one of the most nutritious seaweeds that we all absolutely ignore, and that's rockweed or hawkweed, which it's often called because we like to walk around and if it's dry, step on it and it has this nice pop. Don't do that to live ones. You can find it year-round. It's absolutely fabulous. It is one of the seaweeds that the Alaska Native Medical Center is studying as one of the superfoods, that the nutritional content, the contents of the seaweed has great ability to help people. It's thought that it's very important for diabetics, so if you have diabetes, this seaweed should be in your diet at least once a week. Okay, so what we're looking for, here's a close-up. We have this noticeable holdfast, so it's attached to the rock, you can see that. And then it has these fronds that come out, they're brown at the base and they go out to a golden tip. Okay, the brown at the base just means it's more than 1 year old. The gold tip means that it's this year's growth. Okay? When I'm harvesting it, you can see that cut line there, that's what I like to harvest, is to leave that brown part, and I'll take scissors and just cut off the tips that are nice and flat, and they're absolutely lovely, tasty, make the best stir fry in the world. Okay. What you do want to never harvest are these bulbs or the sacs. For two reasons. One, it's the reproductive portion, so if you were to go through and just randomly take it all, then it would not have a chance to reproduce and come back next year. So you could easily over-harvest a small area of fucus by taking everything. The other reason you wouldn't want to is because the insides of those are kind of slimy. So if you're going to try seaweed, you don't want that to be your first bite. Okay, so this is what beautiful fucus looks like to me. This is this year's growth, and I would just go along and take maybe a third of it, just kind of go through with my scissors and take parts that I want, and then leave enough there so the little crabs and fishes still have some place to hide from the big crabs and the big fishes. The nice thing about this is that you can find it any time of the year. You can find it almost anywhere in the Gulf of Alaska and all the way up into Bristol Bay. And it's fabulously nutritious. Okay, so one way to eat it, to me it's not the most tasty when it's raw. And if you ever do anything with kids, what you do is, and we'll do this, you boil water, and when you dip it in there, it changes from this golden or brown to this neon green. And for every class I've done with kids, which is hundreds, it makes it instantaneously edible. So, good thing to do with kids, and it changes the flavor. To me, it has a nice nutty flavor, which makes it really good for a stir fry. Okay, it does not dry well, so it's something that you want, when you're ready to harvest it, you'll have to get what you need. If you dry it, it will not reconstitute and look fresh again like the other seaweeds. If you dry it, some people will use it for tea, but I prefer just to go out and harvest what I want to eat for that night. Then a week later, go out and harvest some more. Okay, it's a good source of calcium, potassium, magnesium, iron, and iodine. And again, it's one of the seaweeds that the Alaska Native Medical Center is looking at as one of the superfoods. Okay, so this is a seaweed that we all know, and you probably all came here thinking, maybe she'll bring some that I can have. We have a little bit. This part's going to be crazy after. So black seaweed or porphyra, there's about 21 species in the North Pacific. There are 3 that are common in Southeast. The thing about black seaweed, if you're a harvester, you know it has a very short growing season. So we went from fucus, which you can harvest any time of the year at almost any low tide, to black seaweed that has very limited growing areas. People have secret spots, and a very short growing season. Okay? It can cover an entire area. So this rock is the picture after I harvested it. And I'm never telling you where it is. Okay, in terms of different species, you can see the one on the left is the long So it's about 1 inch wide. It can be like easily 10, 15, 20 inches long. The longer it gets, the older it is. And so you want to pick it when it's not too long. What happens is the snails move in and it starts losing its nutritional value and it just isn't quite as nice anymore. Okay, the other one here on the right side, you can see flat against the rock. It's more roundish as it grows. And it's what we call, I think it's a Chinook word, in Southeast it's called gup, as well as down in Canada. And it's not the preferred seaweed. I've heard people say, oh, that's a gup. You know, but it doesn't dry like black seaweed that we know. It doesn't dry like popcorn, like you just sit down and eat a whole bag. But if this is what you harvest, it's fabulously dried and then roasted, and then you just scrunch it up in your hands and mix it with things, and it's a great seasoning, okay? And so if this is what you harvest, don't throw it away, but use it. And if this is what you find, then this will be the seaweed you're using. Okay, so this is the preferred one. You can see on the right where as it dries, it gets a really beautiful black. If it's very new, it's really nice and shiny, and then as it ages, it kind of dulls. I mean, over time, like, you know, after a year, if yours lasts that long. You can see that it's longer than wide. It can be an olive green or it can be a purple green. It is cellophane thin, which means if I put it in my hand, I can see my hand. Okay, it's 1 cell thick.
Whoa.
Has no stipe, no midrib. All we're looking at is the frond. The holdfast is actually quite miniature. You would have to look with really, really good eyes at the base of the rock to find it. And it grows mostly in Southeast, although I have found little spots of it up over in Kodiak, but I can't tell you that place either. Okay, so this is a preferred, and for this, we grew up thinking Mother's Day. That's when you go look for black seaweed. With climate change, that has changed some, and I know that in this area where I live on Haida Gwaii, that there have been several years where this seaweed just hasn't come back, or it came back really early and people just didn't get it. And so part of the reason I do this workshop is, although this is a fabulous seaweed, we have to look at the other ones, because one, if climate change continues and the temperatures are warmer, then that whole seaweed may move more north and we may not have it. It likes cool waters. Okay, so this is what happens in short growing season. By midway, May, the 3rd week of May, by June, you can see it has no color to it. It's going really tan. It's just dying out. And if I were to go there a week later, you couldn't tell that there was any seaweed there. Okay, so again, very short growing season. It likes to grow in areas where there's lots of wave action. So Ketchikan proper is not one of those areas. You might find little bits and pieces there, but when I go for black seaweed, I go to the outside, which is Sitka, a little bit in Yakutat, and Prince of Wales. So it's a good trade item. Okay, the other thing about seaweed is that, black seaweed is that it's a lot of work. You can take an hour and pick like a sack full, you know, if you take out a pillowcase and you think, man, I've got so much, this is so cool, I'm gonna share with so-and-so and so. You have to spend about 1 to 2 days pulling it apart. As it dries, it's very elastic and it shrinks together. And if you don't pull it apart so that that moisture in the middle starts drying, you're gonna have dried outsides and moldy insides. So it's a lot of like, I'm leaning over, my back is sore, and I'm checking it every hour for 2 days. So if someone gives you the seaweed, be very grateful because it's a lot of work. Okay, here you can see vitamin A, B1, B2, niacin. Fabulous, healthy food. And then this is what happens. It shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and then who's on that list of who you're going to share is, you know, cross them off, cross them off. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for not too much. So you can find a lot, you can be really happy. Some people are very good at it and they're good at sharing. And again, if someone gives you some, be grateful, because it's a lot of work. And you don't end up with as much as you think you will. So then that's the reason for looking at the other seaweeds to me. So the alba or the alvaria is the one green seaweed that we're interested in. Its common name is sea lettuce, and as you can see, it's this bright, almost neon green. It's fabulous. I've seen it from here again all the way out to Kodiak. It's a little bit thinner, thicker than black seaweed, which is 1 cell thin. This is 2 cell thick, not thin, 2 cells thick. So it has a little bit more strength to it. It grows now into early summer, and then it can go farther into the summer depending on the area you find it. If it has lots of wave action, it might get beat up. If there's not enough wave action, it might not get nutrients, so it's sort of picky, like all the seaweeds are. You have to find your spot just by looking around a lot and finding what you can find and whether or not you like it. So generally you pick small quantities of this as opposed to the black seaweed where you could pick a lot if you're lucky. Here you're going to be picking maybe a little quart bag and taking it home. The other seaweeds, the other two that I talked about, when you harvest them, you generally don't rinse them, okay? Because they get all the nutrients and all the food value is right in the front from the ocean. If you rinse it in fresh water, you're going to start losing some of those nutrients, okay? This is the one exception because it has lots of little snails that compete with you for it. So here you can see another sample there, but those little holes that you see over snails have been very happily feasting away. It also can grow in areas where there's not a lot of wave action and where there's sediment. So quite often this seaweed can be a little bit muddy when you harvest it. So you either want to harvest it, grab a bucket of good ocean water and rinse it, and you'll be amazed at how much dirt comes out of it. Or take it home and really use some salty water and do a quick dip, rinse, pull it out. But if you rinse it for too long, you're going to lose all the value and you're going to feel like you're tasting paper when you eat it. Okay, there are several species. This is a gorgeous sample. What I look for in terms of the species is the alba, which is this one. When you put it between your fingers and you rub your finger and your thumb together, it won't fall apart. Okay, if it just completely falls apart, that's the alvaria species. It won't dry as well and you're just not going to get as much volume. So the one that I prefer is the one that doesn't fall apart when you rub it between your fingers. Okay, so this is up in Yakutat. So you can see there's areas where it can grow quite large and other areas where there's not as much wave action where it won't grow as large, but it's still nice if you find it. So it has a longer growing season depending on the area that you harvest. When I harvest it, I do use a small knife or scissors because the holdfast is a little bigger than the black seaweed, and if you just pull it, what will happen is you'll pull a little bit of that rock with it. And so when you dry it and then eat it, you might end up biting in just to a bit of rock and do something to your tooth. So I'll take scissors and go along and leave the base of it and take the rest. Okay, and this is what it looks like dried. So it still keeps that nice green color to it. It is very brittle. It dries really nicely. And the way I like to use it is to simply, like the other seaweed, just crush it in my hands. I'll just rub it between my two hands and it makes a powder. To me, it has a really pungent or dark taste to it. When my friend up in Cape tasted it, he went, "Oh, this is what gumboots eat. It tastes like gumboots." So if you like gumboots, this is a seaweed you probably will like. And again, a good source of calcium, iron, and vitamin A. And this does grow around here. Okay, the next seaweed is one that is one of the two seaweeds that we like to eat around here. And this is called ribbon seaweed if you're Tlingit, or if you're from Maine or Europe, or the east coast of like New Brunswick, it's called dulse. It's a palmaria. You can see it's a much thicker seaweed. It's a dark brick red, and it's a fabulous seaweed to harvest that has a larger growing season and is a little tougher in terms of surviving through winter or spring or summer storms. Okay, so here's another sample of it. On the bottom right, you see the schematic. The leaves, the frond of it can be wavy or it can be very smooth. That doesn't matter. Okay, there are several species of the Palmaria, and the names in them have changed a bit, but we're looking for the dark brick red seaweed. And we should be able to find that around here. And it's one of the seaweeds, again, where I use scissors to cut or a small paring knife. Okay, so here's a nice sample in water. This is in Sitka, again, secret location. Okay. So spring to early summer, fabulous seaweed. The trick about it, though, the first time I harvested it was down in Port Alexander, and I was so proud of myself because I had always heard about it but never harvested it. And I went home, put it out. It was wet out, so I dried it in front of my wood stove. And as it dries, it gets this white dust on it. And I was like, oh no, I dried it too slow because of the wood stove and the rain. So I rinsed it and did it again. Same thing happened the next day. So I finally used my brains and called Joanna Woods in Kloak, and she just laughed at me. This is salt and minerals, nothing but salt and minerals. And so she said, if you don't like that, because you might not want too much salt intake, you would take all of that, put it in a paper bag, shake it like crazy, most of the white will come off, and then you'll still have a really tasty seaweed. This seaweed is used by many peoples on the Atlantic side, so it's very common again on the Canadian north, down into Maine, and over into Europe. So if you don't find some here, you can order some through the Maine Seaweed Company, and they have fairly good prices. Actually know some Clinkets who are doing that. Okay. So again, you want to harvest it by scissors. You can see those scissors there are perfect. They're blunt tipped because I slip a lot. So it's serious, you don't want to stab yourself. Use a very small knife or blunt tip scissors, like kid scissors, and you can see I'm harvesting it by leaving the stipe there. It dries leathery, so even when it's dry, it's not going to be all brittle and crunchy. It's still going to have a little bit of elasticity. To make it crunchy, you want to roast it, but that's a little bit tricky. The first time I roasted it till it felt like it was brittle. When I took it out and let it dry, it was burned. So I had to roast it for like 4 minutes, take it out, let it cool down, and then taste it and see if it was brittle enough for me. So it's a little tricky there. When I'm roasting seaweeds, I don't go over 200 degrees. Okay. Somewhere between 185 and 200 is a good range to be roasting any of these seaweeds. Okay, potassium, magnesium, iron, not too high in iodine, but great with minerals and vitamins. Okay, so these are the seaweeds where I said if it's flat, like a piece of paper, whether or not it has a midrib, whether or not it has little lumps along it, if it's flat like a piece of paper and it's brown, you could try it. Okay, so here's just a couple different species that we have. Okay, generally, they're large. They can grow, when they start growing, they'll be like, maybe 10 inches. They can grow up to 40 feet long. Okay, so you can harvest what you want in a very short time for a whole season. The species abundance will vary. There is lots of brown seaweeds around Ketchikan, around Prince of Wales, around all of Southeast that I've gone to. It has a visible stipe and holdfast. So there's the holdfast there. So we went from ones that were just miniature that we could hardly see to this holdfast that looks like a root on top of the rock. And the stipe is right above it. And that gives us an idea of which one we're talking about. These brown seaweeds are the ones that the phycologists have been working at, so depending on whether or not you have a brand new seaweed book or an older seaweed book, the name will be different. So it's one of the times when you want to think of the common name more often than the genus species name. The common name is sugarwack for this one. It used to be called Laminaria saccharina, now it's called Saccharina platysima, I think is how you pronounce it. But since I've been doing this workshop, it's been renamed 3 or 4 times. Okay, so this is a pretty good size pile of them. You can see irregularly shaped bumps along the inside middle of it and smooth on the outside. Has no midrib, so it's just one flat sheet with bumps along it. Okay. When it's fairly young, which is before it gets too big, it has a very sweet taste to it, and that's because it has mannitol. So this is one of the seaweeds, if you're not too sure that you want to try this or that, these as a young one is a very good one to try because of that nice, sweet, easy to accept taste. Okay. This is also one of the seaweeds that it's, from what I've seen, the highest source of iodine that you can find in a natural food of everything that I've looked at. So anyone going through cancer treatment, through radiation, should be eating this seaweed. It's just imperative. And when I went through treatment, I was eating this like twice a day. You're putting iodine into your system because when you get radiation, the iodine that's in your system is getting radiated and then it's moving to the rest of your body. So if you have lots of iodine in you, then it's not going to keep moving around. If you have enough iodine in you, then that radiated iodine isn't going to move out to the rest of your body. And so this is very important for anyone going through radiation, and if you have any kind of, what are these things that liver test? Thyroid issues. This is what you should be eating. Very easy to find, although it does take a low tide. Okay, so it can vary in shape. Here you can see the little stipe on that bottom left side, but otherwise you can see a very, very bumpy surface, but the very edges of it are smooth. Okay, it can start out very small on the left. Those are probably 8 inches long. And 3 weeks when I went back, this is how long it was. Same seaweed. Once it starts growing, it just takes off because in the spring there's all this nutrients in the ocean and it just grows. And so usually I like to harvest this. You can harvest almost throughout the year if you can find it. Okay, the ones that you harvest now are going to have the highest nutrient content. The ones that you harvest in the fall will have less. Okay, because there's going to be less nutrients in the water that they can pick up. Okay, so here you can see one that's fairly old, nice and thicker. This is what the Japanese would call kombu. It's fairly close to what they use as kombu. It's what you would use in a stock. And so if you were to take a leaf of this, or a frond, so there's the irregularly shaped bumps that we're looking for. Sometimes they're all together, sometimes they're split up. Okay, that doesn't differentiate between species. They're both the same thing. Okay, when I'm harvesting it, I want to leave that holdfast in the base of it because it will continue to grow back. So if I were harvesting this frond, I would probably take the smaller one and only take that side because the other side has, you can see, has a little jagged edge there, so it's sort of beat up. And so I would go through, once you find them, you'll just find huge patches of them here and huge patches of them there. You just go through and take a few here and a few there, and you are sustainably harvesting. Okay, so this is what's used as kombu. Some people will, like if you're making a clam chowder, a seafood stew, something like that, you add it to it near the end. You don't want it to boil. You're just going to leave it in there for like 5 minutes. It's going to let go of all the vitamins and nutrients and flavor, and you can pick it up and toss it, or you can cut it up and re-add it. As a seaweed, you can see that it is thick, and so that does make it a bit of an issue for chewing. So I've got some here that have been roasted a bit, so when you taste it, you'll see it takes a bit more chewing to get through it. So when I want to eat it as a chip, I will roast it for the 5 minutes at 200 degrees. You'll see recipes where you can dampen it and then put like olive oil and sesame seeds or chili pepper, whatever you like. And it's just, to me, it's a fabulous seaweed. It's one that we should be eating all the time. Okay. So another one that's very similar to the laminaria is now, it used to be a laminaria, now it's a Saccharina greenlandica, is also very thick, but the whole surface is smooth. So it doesn't have these irregularly shaped bumps. The one that has the bumps on it is much more common in Southeast than this one, but if you find this one, try it. Okay, it might be your favorite. And if I find this one, the way I like to harvest it again is you leave the base and use scissors and just take 1 or 2 of those little fingers and leave the rest of it there, and you're sustainably harvesting. Except don't use those kind of scissors. Okay, so this is a test. What's the seaweed on the right?
Red.
The red one? Oh, okay, dolls are ribbon seaweed. Okay. Okay, so when I got my brown seaweeds, if you were to look closely in here, there's like 3 or 4 different species. There are some that I didn't talk about, but I found them, so I picked them. This is probably 20 minutes of harvesting compared to what it was for black seaweed. This is a piece of cake. Well, harvest it. You just dry it like you're drying clothes, and at the end of the day, it's dry. If you have to dry it inside, that's fine. If it's raining, the same thing. By the end of the day or the next morning, it's going to be dry. With all of these seaweeds, once they're dry, I'll put them in a large plastic bag, like this, and make sure it's fairly airtight, and then I just leave it in a cool, dark place. It'll be good for easily 1 year, and if you don't eat it fast enough, possibly 2 years. Okay, but most people eat it too fast. Okay, so there are, again, different kinds of browns. They have different flavors. Some are sweet, some are a lot more sturdy. Some you may like, some you may not like. So if you see it, write down what it looks like, taste it, and decide whether or not you want to go back. Okay, so this is another seaweed, large brown alaria, has a very large holdfast on the top. Okay, at the base of this, you can see the blue circle. They